The air over the English Channel in the dying days of May 1944 was not merely cold, it was thick, viscous, with the metallic scent of diesel exhaust, the sharp, brine tang of the northern sea, and the chilling, pervasive weight of anticipation.
It was a pressure cooker atmosphere where every logistical calculation, every troop movement, and every scrap of reconnaissance data was weighed in the grim calculus of tens of thousands of lives.
Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history, was hours from execution. And despite the monumental intelligence effort preceding it, the Bletchley Park decryption, the high-altitude photographic sweeps, there remained critical, terrifying gaps in the Allied understanding of the German strongpoints in the immediate landing zones. The focus of this final, desperate intelligence grab fell upon a highly specialized, intensely trained element known loosely as the U.S. Army Provisional Ranger Force. This was not the massed infantry of the Ranger battalions destined for Point du Hoc. This was a hand-picked cadre of operators, drawn from the deepest wells of special operations training, men conditioned for hyper-clandestine work, where the lines between infiltration and suicidal penetration blurred entirely. Their existence was marginal, their missions compartmentalized to the extreme, often known only to General Bradley and the most senior planners at SHAEF. Their purpose in this final 72-hour window before D-Day was to provide actionable, last-minute confirmation of enemy dispositions that aerial photography could not reveal, specifically the relocation of mobile mortar batteries. And, most terrifyingly, the confirmation of concealed Wehrmacht armored reserves positioned to execute a swift counterattack against the vulnerable beachheads. The Provisional Ranger Force was tasked with deploying 5 separate independent reconnaissance patrols, each consisting of exactly 6 men, a patrol leader, a secondary observer/medic, a dedicated radio operator, and 3 multi-role riflemen/saboteurs. 30 men in total, swallowed by the impending darkness of the French coast.
Their departure point was shrouded in deliberate ambiguity, likely a remote staging area near Plymouth or possibly Weymouth, where the smell of wet canvas and newly cleaned rifle oil dominated the air. They were issued darkened canvas uniforms, treated with a foul-smelling chemical wash designed to minimize infrared signature and render them nearly invisible against the deep shadow of the moonless nights they required. Every buckle was taped, every metal element dulled with chemical treatments. Silence was not a preference, it was a mandate for survival. The operational area designated for these 5 patrols centered on the critical junction town of Carentan, a bottleneck of ancient stone and marshland situated strategically between Utah Beach to the west and Omaha Beach to the east. Carentan, once secured, would link the 2 American assault sectors, forming the vital, cohesive front necessary for the breakout into the Cotentin Peninsula. German High Command understood this hinge point perfectly, and the surrounding fields and hedgerows were bristling with defenses, hidden anti-tank ditches, and carefully masked heavy weapon positions. The patrols had 3 primary, overlapping objectives, each weighted heavily with the fate of the upcoming invasion. First, they were to identify and log the precise location of mobile mortar and heavy artillery positions. These guns, often mounted on self-propelled carriages or concealed within the dense bocage, the labyrinthine landscape of high earthen banks and hedgerows, could rain down devastating pre-sighted fire upon the landing craft. Finding them meant immediate counter-battery targeting from Allied naval assets waiting offshore, saving hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives. The second objective was even more chilling: locating Wehrmacht armored units. Intelligence suggested the possible presence of elements of the Panzer Lehr Division or the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division moving into forward staging areas, prepared to exploit any initial weakness on the beaches. These patrols were trained to observe, record, and verify the type and number of tanks, Panthers, Tigers, or the more common Panzer IVs, not to engage them. Their mission was strictly reconnaissance,
Engagement meant failure and annihilation.
Finally, the third objective was pure sabotage, disrupting the critical fiber optic communications network leading into Carrington. German communications relied on a dense web of buried or shallow-laid cables. Disrupting these lines, specifically at marked junction points known to Allied intelligence, would force localized German command to rely on vulnerable radio transmissions, which could then be intercepted, allowing Allied commanders to listen in real time to the German reaction to the invasion. Sabotage required highly specialized cutting tools and induction devices, bulky gear that added to the already heavy load the Rangers carried. The cutting of these subterranean arteries was the tactical priority that justified the patrol's deep penetration.
Insertion was achieved through two distinct, terrifyingly risky methods. 3 of the 6-man teams were designated for maritime insertion, utilizing specialized motorized cutters, small, fast, and remarkably silent wooden-hulled vessels deployed from larger, more robust destroyers or torpedo boats far out in the channel. These missions necessitated a clandestine nocturnal landing onto the rugged, wave-battered beaches immediately south or north of the designated landing zones, far from the established German beach defenses, often where jagged rocks or unpredictable tides made passage treacherous. The sensory reality of the sea insertion was profoundly isolating. The frigid, churning water of the channel in the late hours before dawn pressed down on them. The cutter's diesel engine, muffled by specialized baffles, still hummed a low, unsettling vibration through the hull, felt more than heard. As the men transferred from the cutter into small, rubberized landing dinghies, the smell of salt spray mixed with the coppery taste of fear. The final approach to the beach was accomplished with oars muffled in cloth, guided only by pinpricks of light or navigational bearings calculated down to the foot. The sand, when they finally touched it, was cold, wet, and often unstable, shifting under the weight of their combat boots and heavy packs. They had to move immediately, hauling the dinghy up and concealing it amongst the dunes or rock formations before melting into the shadow of the coastal defenses. The clock began ticking the moment their boots touched French soil. The remaining 2 patrols utilized the second method, low-altitude parachute drops. This was arguably the more technically dangerous method, given the topography. The jump aircraft, often modified C-47s flying dangerously low beneath the German radar umbrella, delivered the Rangers into the labyrinthine hedgerows of the Normandy countryside, miles inland. The altitude was kept intentionally low, minimizing the time available for anti-aircraft fire to track them, but maximizing the risk of catastrophic injury upon landing. The experience of the low-altitude static line jump was brutal. One moment, the cold metal of the plane's interior pressed against the Ranger's back. The next, the violent yank of the chute deploying, followed by the terrifying compressed descent. The darkness swallowed them whole, the ground rushing up faster than standard jumps permitted. Landing in the bocage meant colliding not with open fields, but with the notorious earthen banks, ancient stone walls, or the gnarled, unforgiving root systems of the hedgerows themselves. The muffled impact, often resulting in sprains or hidden internal bruising, had to be ignored instantly. The silk of the parachute, usually a blinding white threat under moonlight, had been chemically treated and dyed dark green or black, but it still had to be rapidly gathered, stuffed into a specialized pouch, and concealed. Or else the white thread of their presence would immediately guide German patrols to their location upon dawn. The smell of ozone from the nearby electrical discharge of the plane mixed with the deep, fertile scent of damp earth and cow manure that clung to the Normandy soil. These missions were extraordinarily short-fused. They were designed to provide the final, actionable intelligence mere hours before the main Allied landings began on June 6th. They operated on a compressed timetable, knowing they had to observe, transmit their findings, and then begin the perilous extraction, or wait for the main force to link up with them, a prospect that grew dimmer with every passing hour they remained exposed. The operational window spanned from the late hours of May 30th through the final moments of June 2nd, the period during which the final invasion decisions were being locked in. For the first 36 hours, fragmented silence reigned. Command centers, highly classified bunkers in the UK, humming with the nervous energy of dozens of high-ranking officers and intelligence analysts, waited, monitoring the specific, high-frequency channels assigned to the 5 patrols. Each patrol carried an SCR 536 radio, famously known as the handy-talkie, or perhaps a slightly more robust, longer-range version, modified for special operations, but still limited by line of sight and the dense, radio wave-absorbing topography of the bocage. Communications required the radio operator to be relatively exposed, extending a minimal antenna and transmitting only pre-coded bursts of information, a maximum of 3 lines of cryptic text detailing locations via grid coordinates, timestamps, and threat levels. The first hint of trouble was the complete absence of positive confirmation. By the afternoon of May 31st, not one of the 5 patrols had successfully transmitted the objective secured burst, indicating they had reached their target zones and were set up for observation. This was unusual, but not yet alarming. Movement through the dense German outer cordon was expected to be slow and fraught. The chilling shift came during the overnight hours of June 1st. A single static-laced transmission bled through the atmospheric interference, picked up by a listening post on a British destroyer patrolling the Northern Channel exclusion zone. The transmission was incomplete, fractured by bursts of noise and environmental disruption. The voice, recognizable only by its assigned procedural cadence, was strained, hurried. The received fragments were meticulously transcribed, then analyzed and reanalyzed by cryptographers, hoping to pull coherence from the noise. The key phrases recovered were sparse. Echo 6 reporting. Crossroads coordinates 493812. Potential armor movement. Contact made. The meaning of contact made hung in the air like an executioner's blade. In the vocabulary of deep reconnaissance, contact made was a euphemism for being discovered or actively engaging the enemy. It was the absolute last word the patrol was authorized to transmit before immediate radio silence, followed by either evasive action or the desperate scramble of a firefight. The transmission offered no indication of which patrol it was, though the general grid reference placed the contact in the marshy, difficult terrain southwest of Carentan, a known avenue for panzer movements toward Utah Beach. Following that solitary, dying transmission, the silence became absolute. For the remaining 48 hours leading up to the scheduled invasion, every listening device, every sensitive antenna was directed toward the Normandy coast. They heard nothing. No scheduled check-ins, no desperate emergency transmissions, no brief coded bursts confirming the location of panzer reserves. All 5 patrols, 30 highly trained, highly lethal operators, had simply vanished within a 72-hour operational window. The silence was louder, more terrifying than any enemy radio chatter. The German defenses in this sector were formidable, manned primarily by elements of the 709th Infantry Division and security troops, Sicherheitstruppen, units which, while often viewed by Allied intelligence as lower grade in quality compared to the SS or paratrooper units, were highly motivated in defending their coastal sectors and ruthlessly effective in anti-infiltration operations. The bocage itself became the deadliest enemy. This unique landscape, characterized by ancient, elevated earth banks up to 8 feet high, overgrown with impenetrable thorn thickets, ivy, and massive gnarled trees, divided the fields into small, suffocating enclosures. Moving silently through the bocage was a physical impossibility. Every step meant scraping boot leather on concealed rock, carrying canvas on unforgiving thorns, or sending cascades of wet, loose soil down the bank. Sound carried strangely in the humid, enclosed air. For a 6-man patrol carrying heavy equipment, operating meters away from German patrols, using the sunken lanes, chemins creux, as natural defensive trenches, the stress was monumental. The smell of the terrain was overwhelming. The constant dampness, the earthy scent of churned mud, the overwhelming sweetness and rot of flowering gorse bushes, and the subtle, chilling smell of wood smoke from distant German cooking fires, a constant reminder of their proximity to the enemy.
If the patrols were intercepted, it would likely have been by a sharp-eyed German security patrol or a section of Feldgendarmerie, the German military police, who were tasked specifically with maintaining absolute security behind the Atlantic Wall. These security units operated under harsh regulations regarding suspected espionage and sabotage, particularly in the weeks leading up to the clear expectation of invasion. The post-D-Day search began almost immediately after the American troops pushed past Utah Beach and began their deadly advance toward Carentan. As the 101st Airborne Division and elements of the regular Ranger battalions secured the critical causeways and began to mop up German strongpoints, specific units were detached with highly detailed maps of the 5 operational zones. Their mission was grim but necessary: locate the remains, the equipment, or the intelligence caches left behind by the missing Provisional Ranger patrols. The expectation was high for recovery. Rangers were trained to hide their tracks, but they were also trained to cache gear if forced to flee, or to establish temporary bivouacs.
Post-D-Day searches of the designated operational sectors yielded nothing definitive. The search teams, operating in the immediate aftermath of ferocious fighting, faced a shattered landscape.
Fields were cratered by naval bombardment, hedgerows were pulverized by artillery, and the air still carried the acrid stench of burned explosives and discarded ammunition.
Yet, among the wreckage, the evidence of the 30 missing Rangers remained elusive. There were no marked graves.
The search for evidence focused first on distinctive U.S. equipment, the specialized canvas of their uniforms, unique medical kits, specific models of silenced weapons, which were not standard issue for regular U.S. troops, or the radio components. Standard Ranger practice mandated that if a man was killed, his dog tags would be recovered by a teammate, leaving only one tag for later identification, or if the entire patrol was overrun, the tags would remain with the bodies. The dog tags that were found were accounted for by the known dead of the main invasion forces. There was no trace of the unique identifying marks corresponding to the 30 missing men. The search expanded to the coastal areas designated for the 3C insertions. The motorized cutters, having dropped their teams, were instructed to immediately depart, leaving no evidence of their presence. Therefore, the search focused on finding the rubberized dinghies or the specific cache sites chosen for their concealment. They found nothing. No rubberized fabric, no specialized oars, no sign that anyone had ever dragged a vessel ashore in those specific coves. The channel, vast and unforgiving, had potentially reclaimed these traces, or they had been found and destroyed immediately by German coastal patrols. Critically, there were no records corresponding to their capture in Axis prisoner logs. This absence of evidence was perhaps the most chilling finding of all. If highly valuable, specialized U.S. Army personnel, clearly identifiable by their unique gear, were captured, standard German military procedure, however brutal, would dictate that they be processed, interrogated, and recorded. The Germans were meticulous record keepers, even in the chaos of war. The lack of any record in the records recovered from divisional headquarters near Carentan strongly suggested that these men were never intended to be prisoners. The conclusion drawn by intelligence analysts and investigators was profoundly unsettling. Immediate, brutal annihilation or execution had occurred upon capture or discovery, possibly carried out by security units operating outside the Wehrmacht's regular command structure, or by SS or Gestapo elements attached to the rear area security forces.
This summary execution would have been designed specifically to prevent any intelligence derived from interrogation from reaching higher command channels, or more simply, to eliminate evidence of Allied infiltration swiftly and without administrative hassle.
The 30 elite Rangers were simply swallowed by the French landscape, absorbed by the dense earth and the relentless secrecy of the pre-invasion environment.
Their disappearance became a cold case file, an enduring, unsolved chapter of clandestine warfare that left behind a chilling historical void. To understand the magnitude of this loss, one must examine the specific training invested in these provisional Rangers. They were not merely volunteers, they were the apex of wartime specialization. Their instruction involved months of intensive training in the desolate stretches of Dartmoor and the rugged coastlines of Scotland, where conditions mimicked the harsh terrain and unpredictable weather of the Atlantic Wall. Their training curriculum focused obsessively on silent killing techniques. They learned to move with the weight of shadows, to communicate using only complex tactile signals, and to subsist on iron rations for extended periods. They were experts in German military recognition, able to discern unit types, ranks, and operational cadence simply by observing a distant silhouette or listening to the pattern of engine noise. The level of operational security surrounding their identity and purpose was absolute. Even within the Ranger community, few knew the full scope of the Provisional Forces missions. The disappearance of 5 entire patrols, representing a significant portion of this extremely specialized talent pool, suggests not just a localized failure, but a cataclysmic security breach, or a deeply unfortunate convergence of random German vigilance and tactical misfortune. One hypothesis, debated fiercely within the closed intelligence circles long after the war, focused on the specific objective of sabotaging the fiber optic communication lines near Carentan. This target was so strategically vital that the Germans likely maintained specific, heavily guarded subterranean bunkers or small, concealed listening posts nearby, manned perhaps by hardened communications engineers or dedicated security troops. If a patrol was detected attempting to dig up or tamper with the thick, tarred casing of the communication cable, a task that required considerable, unavoidable noise and light, however minimal, the reaction would have been immediate and overwhelming. The German response would prioritize the preservation of the communication line over the capture of the intruders. A quick, silent sweep utilizing grenades or close-range bursts of gunfire, followed by the immediate, expedient disposal of the bodies to prevent the discovery of Allied presence, aligns chillingly well with the complete lack of physical evidence found later. Imagine the atmosphere in the early hours of June 1st in the Bocage near Carentan. The air would have been heavy with dew, the moonlight obscured by a deliberate cloud cover. A Ranger patrol, prone in a field of damp rye, perhaps 50 yards from the buried cable junction. The scent of wet soil fills their nostrils, mixing with the distant, faint smell of wood smoke and disinfectant used in the nearby German billets. The patrol leader signals the radio operator to set up for a transmission burst, while the 2 saboteurs begin the agonizing, slow process of excavating the soil above the target cable using specialized non-metallic tools. Every scrape of the shovel, every rustle of canvas against wet grass seems amplified in the darkness. Suddenly, a trip flare, a brilliant, momentary catastrophe of magnesium white light, ignites nearby. The patrol is instantly frozen, silhouetted against the dark green landscape. The sound of German voices, clipped and sharp, and the metallic clatter of Mauser rifle bolts being cycled. The ensuing few minutes would have been a chaotic blur of survival instinct and specialized training fighting against inevitable fate. In that dense terrain, even the highly trained Rangers would be swiftly surrounded and cut off. The equipment they carried, designed for rapid deployment and quick destruction if necessary, would have provided the Germans with invaluable insight into Allied intentions.
The existence of the Provisional Ranger Force and their precise objectives were highly classified. If the Germans recovered specialized radio codes, encrypted messages, or the specific tools for fiber optic sabotage, the security risk to the entire Overlord operation would have been severe. This high-risk intelligence profile provides the most plausible explanation for the immediate execution and complete disposal of the bodies. The German forces would have been under strict orders to eliminate evidence that could confirm large-scale Allied reconnaissance activity deep behind their lines. The quickest, most effective way to eliminate both the evidence and the security risk was to ensure there were no survivors, no living prisoners to interrogate, and no bodies left in recognizable Allied uniform to confirm the infiltration. The subsequent exhaustive post-D-Day searches, often carried out months later when the American forces finally gained secure control of the Carrington region, were painstaking but ultimately frustrating. Investigators checked every farmhouse basement, every collapsed tunnel, and every temporary burial site used by the Germans. They interviewed French citizens who had remained in the area throughout the invasion, but the accounts were vague, often referring only to dark-clad soldiers moving swiftly in the night, or generalized reports of a short, sharp burst of fire heard in a remote field, attributed vaguely to skirmishes with paratroopers. The historical void created by this disappearance is uniquely deep because it involves a total erasure. Unlike other lost military units, where a mass grave, scattered dog tags, or even enemy propaganda confirmed their fate, the 30 Rangers left literally nothing that could be definitively tied to their operation. This operational ghost story had long-term ramifications within the nascent American Special Operations community. The sheer completeness of the failure led to intense internal scrutiny regarding operational security and insertion methodology. Did the use of motorized cutters leave too much of a wake? Was the radio equipment compromised? Or did the patrols rely too heavily on prior intelligence that, unbeknownst to them, had already been countered by the Germans? The official military files concerning the fate of these lost patrols remain heavily redacted, even decades after the declassification of most World War II documents. This continued censorship suggests that the information contained within these files is not merely about the fate of the men, but rather about the incredibly sensitive intelligence they were tasked to retrieve, or, crucially, the sources used to identify the fiber optic communication nodes and panzer staging areas. If the redacted files contain details about how the patrols were specifically targeted, perhaps via a double agent, or through the compromise of a communications protocol, releasing that information, even generations later, could still jeopardize ongoing intelligence operations, or expose techniques deemed too sensitive for public consumption. The fate of the 30 Rangers, therefore, is not just a tragic casualty of war, but a persistent matter of national security classification. The legacy of these 5 patrols lies in their anonymity and their effectiveness in proving a negative. While they did not return with the critical intelligence regarding mortar and armor placement, their disappearance underscored the depth of German security and the extreme vulnerability of clandestine operations in the heart of the Atlantic Wall. Their operational failure was a terrible testament to the dedication of the German rear area defenses. The lack of any POW record has sealed their fate as men lost in action, but denied the small comfort of official recognition regarding their manner of death. They were not captured, they were erased. They remain a silent footnote in the roaring history of D-Day. Men who went in first, clad in black canvas, carrying only the most dangerous secrets, and whose only remaining evidence is the deafening silence of their permanent absence from the record. Their commitment to their mission was so complete that they disappeared without a trace, allowing the main invasion force to proceed without compromising the mission's core secrecy. The French earth holds their final vigil, a chilling monument to the hidden costs of victory.